Hello and welcome back to this Downfall Idealistic Crusade. This video will be my next in my seemingly never-ending series of Laserdisc collection update videos. As I've done in the past, I try to go through every title I pick up on Laserdisc, go through the hows and whys of why I decided on this particular title or where I found it, or, of course, the ever-present notion of sometimes I just find discs for so cheap I can't just leave them there. Like they need a good home, and I take in stray Laserdiscs. It's just it's just what you do. So to go through these as I usually do, I'll just run through in chronological order and then in various particular groupings. This one turned out to be bigger than I expected because usually I try to wait till I have a couple LDs to go over instead of just going over one Laserdisc at a time. But all of a sudden there were a couple things, some really nice finds on eBay, some really cool box sets, and then all of a sudden there was a massive lot traded into our local half-price books, which we actually haven't had for too terribly long. I don't always make it out there, but I've heard from another local collector that all of a sudden a whole bunch of discs got traded in, and it was a lot of uncommon stuff. So lo and behold, I go over there and there was some incredible stuff there. A lot of fantastic titles, pretty much mostly up my alley, which is very rare in terms of lots that come in. It's usually the common stuff, but a lot of Criterion titles, a number of import titles that you never see, and a number of box sets. Unfortunately, they were all priced rather high, so I definitely couldn't afford all the ones I wanted to. Otherwise, I would have truly damaged my wallet. And I will admit that I did go back twice just to chip away at a few more that I couldn't leave sitting there. But that means there's a number of really rare, interesting titles in this particular batch. So I am very happy to be able to go over them in video form, as is my custom on this channel. So to start, just going through the standard disc in chronological order that are not in a particular genre or not going on a shelf or a particular shelf or not box sets. Starting with the 1951 George Pal science fiction classic, When Worlds Collide. This is the Paramount release. This is a really nice LD I've always wanted to check out. The DVD pretty much upgraded this, but it was not a very spiffy looking DVD. It's quite aged. And there is a Blu-ray out, I believe, from Imprint in Australia, but nothing has come out here as of yet. This is a title that's long overdue for an upgrade. Really deserves a big, beautiful edition like, say, the Criterion War of the Worlds. But what's great about this, in addition to having the original audio with digital PCM, this has an isolated score track. So the analog tracks have the isolated score. I don't think it's effects. I think it's just the score. No, it is. I'm sorry, music and effects track. Yeah, so it's on the analog right. So that's the big benefit of this. I'm not for certain. I know when this came out, there was no release of the score anywhere. I don't think there is, but I could be wrong because there's so many great specialty labels and various CD releases that I just have not been able to keep up with entirely. But I know that it didn't carry over to the DVD because I rented that back in the day, and of course it didn't really have any extras that I can remember. And again, the transfer was not very impressive. I have read some people say that the Laserdisc transfer is actually better, so I will enjoy revisiting this on LD. It's spread across 3 sides, and side 3 is in CAV, as is always the custom of most LD releases once they got going. That was always nice that you get the climax of the film in the spiffier CAV format for slightly better image fidelity, but very excited to reacquaint myself with this classic of 50 science fiction, and really I do love the LD jacket. It's in nice shape, and I had been delving into 50 science fiction, so coming across this locally, it was just a no-brainer because I've been wanting to come back to this. I never owned the DVD. There's no Blu-ray here in the States yet, and this has the isolated score. Next up from 1959, this was a really cheap disc at a particular local record store. They had a big box of LDs, and of course, if you say like 3 or 4 for $5, then I go a bit nuts. But next up for 1959 is the really nice Fox letterbox edition of the film Compulsion, with their really nice glossy sleeve they were doing about this time. Helps you to differentiate the later Fox titles from the earlier ones. course, this is the famous courtroom drama based around the Leopold and Loeb murders, and of course has the great summation speech and performance by Orson Welles, which is why I first came to this film. But of course, I love seeing black and white cinemascope films, or any black and white scope film, because it has a whole different feel than, of course, color scope films. And they didn't do it all that often. And eventually, once black and white was deemed a non-money making idea that was gone the way of the dodo, it was extinct. So the particular section of time when black and white scope films were a viable enterprise makes them all the more special. You get lovely Fox liner notes. It's very much in their mid to late 90s final stage of Laserdisc packaging. There's no real extras, but it does include the theatrical trailer. I am looking forward to revisiting this on the Fox release. This is one I always wanted to get. It's just not super common, doesn't pop up all the time, so I was very happy to grab this. I should mention that the audio is credited here as stereo. Most CinemaScope films did originally have 4-track magnetic audio in their initial runs, or they used the mono in the later runs, or they were just plain mono anyway. So I'm not sure if this is actually mono or stereo. I won't know until I play the disc itself. Fox catalog titles are usually pretty good about retaining both if they survive. It just depends on if they survived or not. So this does credit it as stereo, so I'm sure it is probably then the original 4-track mix, probably matrix encoded on here. But again, until I play the disc, I won't know entirely for sure. Next up, from 1979, jumping back to earlier Fox and the classic gray jacket era of Fox disc. This is the classic All That Jazz, directed by Bob Fosse, starring Roy Scheider. This, of course, had been released on a lovely Blu-ray from Criterion from a new scan, but I was very curious about the LD. Again, this is a title that doesn't pop up all the time. It's not fancy or anything, because it's just a standard Fox letterbox disc from 1991, but I was just always curious about the transfer. It is stereo, so I assume it's matrix encoded. It does have this nice jacket in terms of the gatefold. This is the nicest looking gatefold that I've seen on a Fox disc of this era, because it does run the gamut of the actual gatefold, and it doesn't have a bunch of blank space, or it's not just on a black background. And then when you go to the back, it's the standard gray Fox rear jacket, but it does look pretty nice. Has some more liner notes on the back. It uses the space very well. So this I think is one of the best layouts graphically for this era of Fox jacket, and this is still pretty early in terms of their letterbox releases, because of course they started letterboxing with the original Die Hard, which of course came to disc, I believe, in early 1990. So this is still very early in terms of Fox doing letterbox discs. The film is spread across 3 sides. Side 3 is CAV encoded very nicely, and I don't think this has any extras. I don't even think it includes the trailer. Yeah, no, it doesn't. It's just the film only. But what is nice is that the chapter index is very well laid out. There's many chapter stops it's basically 33 chapter stops for the entire film, and then each one details where all of the song sequences are, and so that way you can navigate directly to them, which in this time was not something that everybody did, especially in the early days of letterboxing in 1991. So I have to tip my hat to Fox on that one. This looks like a nice presentation. Again, it does have a stereo track, so I assume that is Dolby Surround encoded, but very curious to check this out and compare it to other transfers. Next up, also from 1979, this is a super uncommon title. Again, not special or anything, but I haven't seen this film in ages. I still haven't gotten the Blu-ray yet, so if I come across a rare LD for $1, I can't just leave it there. If you've seen my many other videos, you should know that fact very well by now. So this is the 1979 film The In-Laws with Peter Falk and Alan Arkin, directed by Arthur Hiller. Again, I remember this being very funny and kind of quirky and in a good way, but it's been a very long time since I've seen it. There is a lovely new Blu-ray. I believe it's a Warner Archive title that I've had on my wish list, just haven't gotten it yet. Unfortunately, the problem, like most Warner discs of this era, this is 1:3:3, so that means it's opened up from the original 1.85 to 1 ratio. So you will have to deal with that. It's of course not the optimal way to view the film, but this does have a PCM audio track. I believe this is mono. I don't think it's stereo or anything. So this again, it's a very uncommon disc. It's not a very super well known film, and it has a pretty nice jacket from Warner with original art, and they at least went with a sort of cream background color on the sidebar instead of the usual generic black and silver. So that helps make it stand out a little bit. And there's actually some nice gloss on the sleeve, so it's not, a dinged up, flat, generic Warner Brothers sleeve. But it'll be interesting to revisit this. And again, I will have to eventually get the Warner Archive Blu-ray, but I couldn't just leave this in the bins because it's, very uncommon. Next is a film I've wanted to get on LD for a long time, simply for the audio. This is a film that has a rather disappointing Blu-ray that has a very bad transfer flaw in it that's never been fixed. It's a pretty decent DVD, at least, which has a really great commentary on it. This is a very underrated film. It's not really talked about now. It's not perfect, but I still adore it anyway. This is one of my favorite films of the 80s, and that, of course, is the 1988 Robert Towne picture, Tequila Sunrise. This is the much harder to find full cover version. I stumbled across this in a local shop for, again, less than $1, which is really cool. It's a little dinged up. It unfortunately has some definite cover creasing and wear, but again, I've wanted to get this. I just didn't want to, plunk down $10 plus shipping on eBay for a copy. And again, most have the big silver bar on the side, and they don't have this really nice art. This is actually my favorite art for the film. It's better than the original poster. This is, technically like the video store poster, but I think it's better than the original. Unfortunately, again, this is not letterboxed. It is 1:3:3. This is a gorgeously shot film by Conrad Hall. It is beautifully shot. It really cries out for like a Warner Archive transfer. The current Blu-ray is okay, but at a certain point, the transfer goes all iffy, and it's never been fixed. And that it's really a shame because this film, I mean, if this got a 4K scan, it would be, one of the best looking catalog UHDs you'll ever see in your life. It is gorgeously shot. It's a lot of fun. It's got a very inherently dark, gritty crime vibe. Is definitely coming in the wake of the sort of 80s neo-noir boom that started pretty much when Lawrence Kasdan made Body Heat at the start of the decade. But great performances. The primary trio of Mel Gibson and Kurt Russell and Michelle Pfeiffer. Raul Julia shows up about halfway through the film and practically steals everything that is not nailed down. It's a fantastic film. It's a better film than you remember when you come back to it. It has a particular style. It's also got so many small moments that are all about not treating your audience like they're stupid, which is so refreshing because the vast majority of films today insist on doing that, which is infuriating. This may be my favorite Kurt Russell performance in any film. Mel Gibson is fantastic. It's one of his best performances. Michelle Pfeiffer is outstanding. And again, Raul Julia steals everything that is not nailed down. The ending is a little bit confusing and muddled, as is the opening. There was some problems with test screenings and Warner Brothers, maybe asking for some other things to be tweaked and changed. But it doesn't derail the film. It has caused some people not to like it as much or kind of write it off. But it's a much better film than people give it credit for. It is, I think, one of the forgotten gems of the 80s. And I'm just very happy to have the nicer full cover version now on Laserdisc. And I will be checking out the Dolby Surround PCM on here, comparing it to the DVD and the Blu-ray. But again, this is one of those titles that really needs a new transfer. It is beautifully shot. I think it's one of the best shot films of the 80s, and of course, full of gorgeous sunrises. So if you've never seen this film, please do yourself a favor and check it out. I think this is my favorite Robert Towne picture, outside of Chinatown that he was involved in. It's not perfect, but I still love it anyway. I love the tone, I love the feel, I love the fact that the main characters are very three-dimensional and very human, very flawed. But again, still likable, and I love the plot setup. I love everything about this. I do wish the beginning and ending were a little bit less less muddled. Again, nothing is perfect, but I still love this film anyway. Very happy to finally have the nicer LD jacket version. Next, from 1993, this is a Sony title that I thought I was never going to find because, of course, it being a Sony Columbia title, that means you have to deal with the dreaded DADC USA plant, and most of their disc will be rotted. So you wind up looking for the DADC Austria variant, and then the rare time that you find one in the wild, you do a happy dance, and people have no idea what you're doing, and they will not understand if you try and explain it. So I very luckily, locally, found a super minty copy of Groundhog Day. Again, this is the DADC Austria release, so this is a rot-free pressing, and now I can finally check out the LD version and listen to its version of the film's original Dolby Stereo mix on the digital track. Uses the original art and has the usual nice Sony Columbia write-up in terms of the liner notes. Sony discs always have the full jacket of notes, so you can sit there and read. Of course, no real extras, just a single CLV disc. It doesn't even have the trailer or anything. But what's great about their liner notes is it literally is an interview this time with Harold Ramis. So it's got him quoted throughout because it's an actual interview piece. So it's not just a thing of liner notes. It's an actual vintage interview from the time of the production of the film and getting his view on it. So, of course, there are later editions. There's the lovely new 4K edition, but I always love seeing, the letterbox Laserdisc presentation from the era and getting to hear its presentation of the original sound design. But, of course, what's all important is the fact this is an Austrian pressing, and once the shrink wrap is taken off, you don't have the sticker on the back. You have to look at the actual disc codes. So I pulled the disc out of curiosity and thankfully saw the manufactured by DADC Austria, and I was like, yes! But then once I got it home, I noticed this actually has a printed sticker on here, so on the actual jacket there. So, of course, if I had just seen that, I would have been fine. But that's what you're looking for. That's what you want to see on any Sony disc. If you don't see that, you are going to have to play the lottery. Not every DADC USA disc, whether it's Sony or not, is rotted. They did a number of Criterion titles, which I have and are perfectly fine. But the vast majority of their Sony titles, because of course it's the Sony plant, that's primarily what they did, do have rot problems, and some are absolute, death critical rotters. Films like The Net, The Professional, stuff like that you just don't even need to bother. So it's always helpful, and you'll know 100% for sure that you've got a clean copy if, of course, it is the all-important Austrian pressing. And I've tried to find this for ages, but I could never verify. And I'm always leery about buying Sony discs if I can't verify if it's an Austrian pressing or not. So this is just one more to go on my DADC Austria rot-free pressing shelf. So last on the standard disc is a film from 1994. This is an HBO video release. It's a film I've always wanted to see, probably not for the reasons why most people are, but this was directed by Martin Campbell, and of course, being a Bond fanatic, I try to see every film that Bond directors did outside the series. But the success and strength of this film, it wasn't particularly financially successful, but in particular, John Calley saw this, and he was head of MGM at the time that was trying to relaunch itself, and they were preparing what would become GoldenEye, that would jumpstart the Bond series after the 6-year gap. Well, he saw this film, and that's what made him decide that Martin Campbell would be a viable choice to direct the film that became GoldenEye. So this is really the picture that got Martin Campbell GoldenEye and got him into the Bond series. So that, of course, is the 1994 film No Escape. Again, this is an HBO presentation, but due to the widescreen box on the top, it looks almost like a live home video release. It may be, it just doesn't have their logos on it. Not a rare title. It is more common, but I've never really seen it floating around the bins. It does have the original Dolby Surround, or should I say Dolby Stereo on the digital tracks. I don't know if this had AC3 on release. It may have, because of course it's 1984 in the middle of the digital sound era. But this is just a standard single disc. I was happy to find this because I've always wanted to see this, knowing that this was the film that got Martin Campbell the job directing GoldenEye. And of course there's a pan and scan version that doesn't have this bar on the top, but is otherwise the same. So this is one of those you got to make sure you're getting the widescreen letterbox copy, because otherwise you'll be like I did when I bought the pan and scan of Congo, like an idiot. You've got a pan and scan disc that's useless. But yeah, just wanted to see this for ages because of the Martin Campbell connection, and it does have pretty decent reviews, for what it's worth. But yeah, I'm still continuing in my mission to see every non-Bond film directed by a Bond director. So next are two quasi-Criterion titles. They're not Criterion, but they're still Janus films, and if you're going to collect Criterion, you also have to worry about collecting the Voyager Group Laserdisc, which is the separate sort of arm. So I don't really think you're Criterion complete unless you have all the Voyager discs. And there are, some that probably are not going to be super attention grabbing, but there's always been some that I've really wanted to find, and I don't think any more so than this particular disc, which I've always wanted, even though it is kind of outdated now by other releases of the same material. But this is the Theater of the Imagination disc. This is the collection of Mercury Theater and Orson Welles' radio work, in addition to the Mercury Theater on the Air plays, other things that Welles did in his radio days, which really broke so much new ground that it is so vitally important to the history of radio to understand the gravity of what the Mercury Theater did, not just the infamous War of the Worlds broadcast in 1938, which is all most people know, but the entire scope and body of work that is the Mercury Theater on the Air in its various incarnations, and all the tireless work that Welles did as a true radio pioneer. This was like the first major collection, in terms of doing a big official release back at this time, and really is a very unique Laserdisc because it is all audio. There is some video in terms of stills and things, but the entirety of the disc is devoted to the audio. So you have to use the very handy rear to understand where everything is, but it uses the entirety of the digital track and it uses the entirety of the analog track. So it uses both tracks on both disc sides to basically give you, every last scrap of information they could cram on here, every last radio broadcast and show. And again, it's nicely laid out here, but you will have to jump back and forth. So basically you put the disc in, you play it, you listen to the digital tracks like normal, and then you stop, you restart the disc, and you switch over to the analog tracks. And then, of course, you will have to separate the analog tracks because, again, just to maximize space, they include programs on analog track 1 and analog track 2, just like a commentary track would have been. So if you want to listen to that, you will have to specifically select on your player, or if you have dual outputs, you'll have to, pop around your plugs just to get, 2 left or 2 right. But again, it's all beautifully laid out here, which programs are where. And this gives you a nice selection of, it's basically the Mercury Theater and Welles' greatest hits. So, of course, you do have some of the greatest hits selections of the Mercury Theater. I'd say probably most interesting, of course, you get their version of Rebecca, which you can always compare to the novel and the famous Selznick film directed by Hitchcock. It's, of course, I find it fascinating hearing Welles in all these various stories that, he was not in the film adaptation of, and getting to hear his attack on the material. Most interesting, I think, is being able to listen to the Mercury Theater's version of Heart of Darkness, which, of course, was to be Welles' first film for RKO and was almost made, but canceled at the last minute due to budget concerns. And, of course, Welles wound up making Citizen Kane instead. But it's great to be able to hear his radio version from the Mercury Theater and sort of get at least in audio terms, in the mind's eye, a version of what maybe his vision of the story would have been like. It continues on. It's not just Mercury Theater pieces. It's also stuff that Welles did outside the Mercury Theater. For me, being a giant Shadow fan, the best part is it includes the episode The White Legion, which is one of the best episodes from his tenure in the first 2 seasons. And of course, most radio stuff, not all of it survives, and it did need restoration work. There was some done for this. It's unfortunate not all of this could be on the digital track, but because it's just a single LD, they had to use the analog tracks as well. They do include a really nice, pretty lengthy 40-minute documentary. It is audio only, but it's a really great piece. I don't know if it's elsewhere. It may be exclusive to this LD. I'm not entirely for sure, but it's a whole 40-minute audio documentary about Wells and the Mercury Theater on the air. So even though there are newer restorations and you can easily find most of the stuff online for free, this is still a really great time capsule, a really fantastic piece. It's easily my favorite and most interesting of the Voyager discs, and really shows how under the Voyager line, they were really trying to do different things and be a way of documenting history and the world around us in the, laser video disc form. So this is one I've always wanted to find, and I'm so happy to finally have this in my collection. Next is another Voyager disc. This is a really great, it's really one of the classic documentaries in terms of documentaries about films or film personnel. And of course, it's been reissued many times on DVD, but this was the first major release and the only time it was, it includes PCM audio. Even though it's just talking heads, it is cool to have PCM audio instead of lossy audio. This is also a gift from another fellow local collector, so thanks to Ron Hall for this really cool Voyager edition of the George Stevens documentary, A Filmmaker's Journey, with this really beautiful cover photograph, again, from Voyager. This was a documentary made by his son, George Stevens Jr., who also wrote a book about his father and several, actually many books about classic Hollywood, and has done many great interviews with people who are, of course, no longer with us, and has been a source of great research material. Again, this has been released on DVD and has been included, I think, in some extras packages of George Stevens titles. But again, this is the really nice Voyager Laserdisc presentation, and you get PCM audio. Stevens is one of the great underrated directors, especially today. He's not a name that's thrown around all that often, but he really should be, because he directed, some of the iconic, towering classics of the medium, from Gunga Din to Giant to, and it also helped many other films get classic status and helped many stars along in their careers. For example, like Katharine Hepburn on the classic Alice Adams. He had a real knack for getting across the human side of various characters and really getting it out of actors and creating a real intimacy on the screen in terms of interpersonal relationships. And you can really feel that, particularly in his earlier films before World War II, which he was one of the directors that went into the service and served in the filmmaking unit and did kind of come back a changed man and individual. That is gone over in this documentary, but you can feel it in his later films, really culminating in the big epic, The Greatest Story Ever Told, which is still a film that needs a proper Blu-ray release and 4K scan, or higher res scan than that, really, being a large format film. As a film that's been cursed on home video. It didn't have the greatest release. It was a notorious box office failure. And then kind of, after that, Stevens' career didn't really go much of anywhere else in that era of Hollywood. But he directed so many fantastic classics. It's impossible to choose a favorite, really. It'd probably be between Gunga Din and the fantastic film The More the Merrier, one of the great screwball comedies that also has a really great human emotional core that Stevens was really... no one else has really gotten that same sort of intensity of emotion, and again, it's this very intimate quality to the interpersonal relationships, even in lesser films or films that in the studio era he was contracted to do, or were not A features. You can still feel that in certain moments. So I'm really excited to revisit this on the beautiful Voyager Laserdisc release. Then I have one more Disney title to continue to chip away at trying to get all of the Disney films in their best editions on Laserdisc, which means most often striving for the CAV versions. I am almost complete in that journey. There's still a handful that I'm missing that are still eluding me. This one really drove me crazy trying to find it at a decent price, because I don't know why it doesn't pop up very often. It's not rare, but every time it does pop up, people have a $20 or $30 price tag on it, and especially trying to find the CAV version, it's almost never around, and it's got practically the identical cover. The only difference is the catalog number and that it's 2 discs instead of 1. And of course is the CAV edition of Oliver and Company. Again, why this is so hard to get at a decent price, I don't know, but it has eluded me for years. It's one of the handful of Disney Laserdisc titles that I was still missing. It's one of those that hasn't really been changed all that much. It doesn't really have any egregious problems like certain other Disney titles, but of course, this does have the Dolby Surround encoded original audio as PCM. It is CAV. There has been some grain management on the Blu-ray release of this, but it's relatively okay. But I still like trying to find what can best be termed like the purest option in terms of Disney home video releases for various titles. And trying to get all of the Disney films in their best editions in CAV is actually very tricky. Once you get to a certain point, titles like this become very elusive, and everybody wants an arm and a leg for them simply because they're Disney releases. This is, of course, 133. The film would have been matted widescreen in theaters originally and is that way on Blu-ray, but this is how it was on video. And with it being an animated title and it not being scope, you are getting more picture information. Of course, it is not the theatrical ratio, but that's how this entire era of Disney was on home video all these years. So I'm just very happy to finally have this one. I am one closer to Disney completion for having the best purest options on Laserdisc. There's still a couple more that are unfortunately even more elusive than this one, but I definitely say in terms of trying to find all the films on CAV outside of box sets and special editions and things in their standard form, this is definitely the hardest of the Disney titles to find in CAV that isn't a reissue or a box set or an archive collection disc or something like that that is incredibly rare. This is definitely the hardest standard CAV title to find at a decent price. Next are the biggest surprise of local finds in ages. These are all again from that massive lot that was traded into our local half price books, and this was the section that blew my mind the most because you don't expect to find Criterions and rare box sets all the time, but you certainly don't expect to find import titles and especially Hong Kong films in import Laserdiscs just in the wild in a local store in your area, especially not all the time, and especially without a exceptionally high price markup. So these were all massively under the normal eBay values and LDDB values, and I was just stunned to find these. So they did have some priced higher. I didn't get all of them, but I always also try to make sure it's going to be an edition I can watch in terms of, what's the audio track? Does it have the original, Cantonese or Mandarin audio? Is it uncut? Is it a good print? Does it have English subtitles? Well, or is it going to be a disc that I buy simply because of the rarity and it's a film I love and it's not necessarily the greatest edition in the world? But again, I picked the ones that were my favorites and the ones that were cheap and not marked up very high. And some of these were just absurdly cheap, so I just went ahead and got them anyway. But this one is definitely the most surprising in terms of it being there. It's an immaculate shape. These all still had their protective sleeves because these were all imported back in the day, primarily I guess by Tai Sing, who did most of the pretty much all the imports and would sell them here in the States. But this one, I could not believe this was there. This is a very exceptionally highly regarded LD title until recently when the film got a Blu-ray upgrade and is now was ported by the Warner Archive here, which I still need to get. This was the way to watch this film. It was the only major way to see the film uncut with its original audio track. It's not the greatest transfer in the world, but it is English friendly. It does have subtitles, does have the original audio, and it is one of the Maya Gold Disc releases, and definitely the most famous of these. So lo and behold, I go into a store and see sitting on the shelf for the low price of $3.99 the Maya Gold Disc of Drunken Master II in its original shrink wrap sleeve with the Tai Sing import English language. I mean, I guess this is technically an Obi strip, but it's something Tai Sing would do to actually make it understandable for us English language buyers here in the U.S. I could not believe this thing was just sitting there, and especially not at this price. The only thing, though, that differentiates this, it does have the gold cover in terms of the foil, but it is not itself the gold plastic. So again, you can see here, it's the same release, but it's one of the ones that was just printed as a standard Laserdisc. So it might make it slightly less collectible, but it's no different from the gold disc version. And of course, because this is the original plastic sleeve, it still has the special import stickers on there, as you can see. This is a bilingual disc. It carries both the original Cantonese and the original Mandarin soundtracks, and it does have English subtitles. Because it is bilingual, I'm not for certain. I believe, I guess the Cantonese is on the digital track and the Mandarin is on the analog, or some actually split up because they're mono. Some, the digital left will be one, the digital right will be the other. I can't remember for certain because I have to always reference the Laserdisc database because it's very difficult on Hong Kong films and imports to remember which LD is which pressing is which has which audio track, and which is English friendly, complete with subtitles. So I will admit on these, I did have to sit there with my phone and in front of the shelf and just be looking stuff up. But this was the immediate grab. I could not believe this was sitting there. I've seen versions of this floating around. I've seen terrible attempt. Well, not terrible, but not the greatest quality, attempts to capture this LD. And of course, we now have the Warner Archive Blu-ray, which, while it is a port, I think, of a Japanese Blu-ray, and it's definitely the best the film has been on disc to date. It's not perfect, but it is, a solid option, and it is uncut with original audio and English subtitles, which I still need to grab. It's been on my wish list for too long. But to finally have the, legendary Maya uncut Laserdisc release, especially in this immaculate shape, is just really fantastic, and sort of a piece of video collecting of Hong Kong films. It's a piece of HK video history. Now, the rest are all Hong Kong classics that I love and adore. These are all editions from the Golden Cinema City Video Distribution Corp, which did most of these, and they all have a similar design. All are very uncommon. A handful of these do pop up quite frequently and aren't super expensive. Unfortunately, most of these don't have digital audio tracks, and of course, with these films, the transfer quality is always going to vary. I've always wanted to get some of these. They're just usually so rare or so expensive, the cost doesn't justify the cost of importing one from Japan or paying an absurdly high price on eBay. And I will always try to go for the ones that have digital audio because, the much superior audio playback performance. And most of these, that is actually the best sounding release for most of these films anywhere. And a lot of the really fantastic new Blu-ray restorations from companies like 88 Films or Eureka Masters of Cinema, or even some of the Criterion releases, I think, they are having to turn to really knowledgeable Hong Kong fans of Hong Kong films to actually source Laserdisc audio captures because the elements simply aren't there, and the studios are not as good as what's on the Laserdisc editions. So it makes these all the more special. But this one in particular, it is analog only. It's not a fancy edition. There is a later one that is on the database, the LDDB, that does say it has digital audio, but I've never physically seen one, and there's no picture of it. But I couldn't just leave this there. It's one of my favorite Hong Kong films, one I show a lot of people for a number of reasons. And that is, of course, the classic City on Fire. This is the standard LD release, still in the import jacket. I love that it's got a brand new sticker on it, using a version of the poster art. This was one of the the second major breakout film for Chow Yun-fat after the success of A Better Tomorrow. But this, directed by Ringo Lam, one of the great Hong Kong action films. Beautiful usage of art on the rear, as most of these discs do. This is English friendly. It does have English subtitles. It has the original Cantonese. I think it's also got... No, it's Cantonese only. So it's got the original Cantonese mono. It does have English subtitles. I will be very excited to spin this up and check out the transfer, because sometimes, as long as it's well done, I do have a lot of fun with direct print transfers from this era. As long as they're mastered well, you can have a lot of fun, and they can be really enjoyable and very vibrant. But of course, if they're not done very well, then it becomes very much like a grindhouse experience, which does have its own charms as well. Of course, The reason why I champion City on Fire so much, and what always comes to mind whenever I think of the film, is the fact that this was the film that Quentin Tarantino completely ripped off for Reservoir Dogs. So if you ever liked Reservoir Dogs and you always wondered what happened at the jewelry store heist and all the extra story bits that we never get in that film, that's all in City on Fire. City on Fire is the better film. It has complete character arcs, whereas Reservoir Dogs basically takes the final act of this film and puts a whole lot of pizzazz on it and the various Tarantino character monologues and things, which is fine and it's totally his style and things. But that film so completely borrows, shall we say, so blatantly from City on Fire, and this was never credited, that it is really an example, I think, of cinematic plagiarism. Not that I think that Tarantino is a bad guy, but it's just one of those times where it's so blatantly obvious. There are even shots and sequences that feel basically directly lifted from this. When I first saw this film, it started feeling so familiar because I, of course, seen Reservoir Dogs. And then by the time I got to the ending that ends in a Mexican standoff inside a warehouse with the cops coming and the notion of one of the criminals being perhaps an undercover cop with the elder statesman of the gang believing in him against everyone else, and then again it's culminating in a Mexican standoff with everyone holding pistols at each other's head inside a warehouse with the cops closing in. It's a little bit familiar, and I'm like, oh my god, really? I had heard of that notion before, but I didn't know which film specifically that was linked to Reservoir Dogs. So that's part of this film's legacy. That's why I like to show it to so many people. It's a fantastic film. It's one of the Hong Kong classics, and I'm so excited to check it out on this Laserdisc release. Again, this is extremely uncommon. I could not believe this was there, and it's one of my favorites. So even though it's not going to be the best edition in the world, it's not like this film has a really great edition. There is no great Blu-ray. The best you can do really is one of the foreign import DVDs. The one here in the U.S. had a terrible 5.1 dub. It's just awful. So this is hopefully, if the transfer is good, this should be a fantastic way to re-experience this film on this exceptionally rare import copy of City on Fire. Surprisingly, they had even more Hong Kong discs, so I, of course, gravitated immediately towards the John Woo titles since I'm such a giant fan of John Woo's Hong Kong films. I think they're just absolutely one of a kind, and just blown away the fact that all these were there. Unfortunately, it wasn't all of them, and it wasn't some of the later ones that had digital audio, but again, in such mint shape for so cheap, and never seeing these physically in person ever, I had to just go ahead and grab the rest of them. So they had the original Golden Cinema City video distribution copy of A Better Tomorrow from 1986, which is really the film that launched Chow Yun-fat and John Woo to the world and really exploded the Hong Kong action genre as it came to be known, and especially, in particular, what John Woo specialized in, what became known as the heroic bloodshed genre. This became the most successful film in Chinese history up to that point, is enormously influential, and is still one of the greatest action films ever made, especially because of its attention paid to character and character depth and the primary lead performances. This spawned two sequels, which neither are as good as the original. The third is really a prequel, and John Woo didn't make that. It was made by the producer Sui Hark. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, I never know if I am. But Better Tomorrow 2 has great action sequences, but also doesn't match up to this original film, which is a classic. I wish they'd had A Better Tomorrow 2 on Laserdisc, because that one is exceptionally rare, as is this one. This did later get a release with digital sound in some territories. There are PAL versions as well, but it is just very uncommon and very rare to see it in any Laserdisc incarnation. This still does not have a great release. It did get an Anchor Bay DVD here that's pretty good, but you have to find the later corrected version, and that itself is quite rare. It was scanned and restored in 4K, but unfortunately it has not been released outside of foreign territories, and it had a pretty crummy color grading job by the same Richard Vada studio that ruined The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly 4K master for all these years. So this is going to be an interesting way to watch the film. Again, it is English language friendly, has the original Cantonese mono, but it is analog only. It is letterboxed. I think these are all credited as being like 166 to 1 in terms of their ratio on the Laserdisc database, but I know that could kind of vary once you actually put the disc in and look at it yourself. It does have English subtitles, so you can get this, watch it, and if you're, if you can't speak fluent Cantonese, and I'm sure it's going to be just, like burned in subtitles, probably from whatever print source they were using. But as you can tell, they use beautiful original poster art on the front, the sort of photo collage style design. So this is wonderful. It is very frameable. It's also on a nice sort of glossy stock. It's a very thick card stock, like most Japanese discs would be. And the rear has beautiful imagery from the film. This is very highly collectible, as are all of these Hong Kong films. They are extremely rare. This is the only time I've ever seen any version of A Better Tomorrow physically in person ever, outside of looking on the Laserdisc database and drooling. So even though it's not digital audio, I will have to stick with analog only, and you always have to play the transfer lottery with these. I am super excited to revisit one of my favorite action films of all time, one of John Woo's masterpieces, and look at it on the Hong Kong Laserdisc release. And again, amazing to find, even still in the original import sleeve. These last two are much more on the common side. These turn up pretty regularly on eBay. You can get them for decent prices without breaking the bank. They usually go for $10 to $20 each. I always wanted to get them, especially because they both have digital audio and they're much more available than, say, Better Tomorrow 1 and 2 or City on Fire. But to find them locally, still in their import sleeves, in perfect shape for, very inexpensive prices, I was like, yes, these are immediate grabs. So, of course, I had to get the standard release of John Woo's Bullet in the Head, which is a really fantastic, very underrated film that shows John Woo really trying for, reaching for other genres. This is maybe him shooting for being maybe a little bit more David Lean-esque. There's definitely a feeling of maybe a little bit of Apocalypse Now as well, because of its setting. Its tone is very dark. This is a really wonderful film that, most people might think is a Hong Kong action film, but it's really a character drama, and it's a war film, really. So it's new ground for John Woo at this time. It wasn't very successful, but it has gained a definite cult following. It is very well regarded now, and it's also got a heck of a lot of versions floating around. There is still no complete restoration of this film. There's no great new transfer. There's no great Blu-ray, unfortunately. Again, the best you can do is one of the foreign import DVDs, but even then you have to make concessions. And the film also has several different endings, so it is very difficult to know which version is on which disc, and you really don't know outside of internet forums until you actually put it in and watch it yourself. This is credited as 2 hours. It has digital audio. It is widescreen. It does have both the Cantonese and Mandarin versions, and again, I think it's on the digital tracks, left is Cantonese and right is Mandarin. I think it's split that way, so you will have to select with your remote which track you want to listen to. But again, I can't remember for sure which ending this is supposed to have. The film either ends with a very epic action sequence of dueling cars, literally that's the best way to describe it, or a more somber, understated ending that basically skips the dueling cars part. I don't know for sure which ending this has, because I've never seen this. I've just read about it. And again, I do believe this is supposed to be fully uncut because it is credited at 2 hours. I don't think it's missing anything major. But again, Bullet in the Head has so many versions and so many edits floating around out there that practically every video release is almost slightly different from another. But this is still a great way to watch the film. It is English language friendly. It does have English subtitles. It is readily available. You will have to go on eBay or the Laserdisc database, but you can get a copy of this usually for less than $20 if you really want it. So it is one of the Hong Kong films with an English friendly version out there that won't break your wallet, but you just don't find them in this minty shape, especially not locally. And then lastly is their rather underrated John Woo action film that really is more of a foray into comedy. That, of course, is Once a Thief, which is a really charming film, but also with great, typical of John Woo action sequences. It's one of his Hong Kong classics for sure. This is another of the more common and relatively available here in the U.S. Hong Kong films on Laserdisc. Again, you can get this for about $20, usually on eBay, give or take. Sometimes a little less. It is English friendly. It does have English subtitles. It does have PCM mono, and once again, it is Cantonese and Mandarin. So again, I believe it's split on the digital track, so you will have to select with your remote which one you want to hear. Otherwise, you're going to be listening to both at the same time. But same sort of art design, nice imagery, even though it is a little bit plainer. It doesn't like have a full poster art spread or anything. All on a single CLV disc, and again, it will have burned-in English subtitles. At least I guess they'll be burned in. It's possible they're just in the letterboxing area. And again, this is letterbox, so this is a decent, well, actually a pretty solid way to watch the film. There was a pretty good US DVD, actually, that was complete and had English subtitles. But this is another title that doesn't have a great HD version or a great Blu-ray. All these films really need proper treatment on video. They've never really gotten it. So it's sad to say that getting these super old import Laserdiscs is still a viable way of watching these, because they don't have definitive video releases yet. And especially the John Woo Hong Kong films, they're all classics and they all deserve the 4K treatment. And why they haven't really seems to be because they seem to be in like rights hell limbo. And even when like A Better Tomorrow gets a 4K scan, it's problematic and it's only released in certain territories because we just can't have nice things for these films. We just can't. So it's really fantastic to finally have this version, and I'm very excited to revisit the film on this and check out the LD transfer. This was also at the Half Price Books lot. This is getting on to titles that are going to be grouped by director. This is a particular Laserdisc exclusive. These are particular titles with a particular formatting that are exclusive, and of course are a bit of a misnomer and a bit confusing. I've gone over it in my other videos, but they are very uncommon to find because they're entirely separate from the common standard letterbox editions. That, of course, is referring to James Cameron films on Laserdisc and the quote-unquote director's pan and scan editions. So this is the very rare variant of True Lies, which again is a super important LD, as it was one of the first, along with Clear and Present Danger, to ever feature an AC3 5.1 track, really introducing that to home consumers, and is a very common LD that belongs in every collection because of that. But this is the very rare 4:3 variant, so the picture transfer is framed at 1:33:1 to match CRT televisions of the era, giving you more picture information on the top and bottom. It is a custom reframing, as Cameron would do on all of his titles once he got the clout to do so. And they're credited as director's pan and scan. They were printed in much smaller batches, it seems. They are very rare to find these days, and they exist for all the major Cameron titles, from True Lies to Terminator 2, The Abyss, and eventually Titanic as well. Other than that, it's the same exact art design. It's got the same exact gatefold as the standard version. And the disc labels are pretty much the same, but of course they do credit being the pan and scan version. I wish they hadn't used that term, because it is very confusing for most people, because they're not pan and scan. They're basically, if anything in the world was ever open mat, it would be these. Cameron liked using the Super 35 format, which would result in a scope image once it was formatted that way. They would take the scope image dimensions out of the film frame itself. But on televisions, he didn't like throwing away the resolution, so he made these custom versions back in the day that would use the full bandwidth of NTSC video resolution in 4:3 by giving you more on the top and the bottom, but you, of course, lose some on the sides. But that meant to do it correctly, they had to be custom done by hand and custom framed, and these have never really been reissued. They're definitely not on the later DVD and Blu-ray versions. So for completists and people who really love these films, these are versions you will have to find as well, and they are very uncommon. What's also great on this release, it retains the goofy joke of the AC3 release that the fourth dead side on terms of disc 2 has the Omega Sector logo from the film's fictional spy agency. Again, the only way to tell this from the standard release is the standard one has the usual Fox letterboxing banner on the top. This one has the custom gray with red text director's pan and scan edition. That's how you differentiate this aside from the catalog number. So if you're looking for this online or you're looking at pictures of Laserdisc, you will have to verify that it has that banner on the top. In terms of audio, it's the same as the AC3 release. It has Dolby Surround PCM and it has AC3 5.1. I haven't got to spin this yet, but I'm pretty sure this is going to be the same unfortunate transfer as the letterbox copy that unfortunately is also on the DTS version, which has the best audio overall. The film still has a really powerhouse mix for the time. It still holds up today. It's my favorite aspect of this film is the audio mix on disc. But the DTS version is the one to go for in terms of audio performance, but it itself is quite rare and expensive. This one kind of sits in the middle in terms of price. The standard AC3 one is ultra common. You shouldn't pay more than $1 or $2 for it. This one can go for quite a chunk of change simply because of the alternate ratio. But I'm pretty sure this will probably have the same picture master as a base, which unfortunately was hit with tons of noise reduction and edge enhancement, and it's still a solid Laserdisc experience, but it definitely is not what it could be. It definitely has the telltale signs of tons of DNR and tons of edge enhancement. So if you're sensitive to that sort of thing, as I am, this is not going to be the most pleasurable experience watching the LD. But again, there's still no Blu-ray for this film, so this is still a film with compromised video editions. But this is how you see it in its custom 1:3:3 ratio. This is the only major way to see it, and it's still a very rare, nice Laserdisc exclusive collectible title. Then continuing on, this will go with my Sidney Pollack shelf. This is the Sony Deluxe letterbox reissue of Tootsie. I got this because it's a very uncommon disc, rarely pops up, and I was curious how this compared against the Criterion Special Edition. You get original poster art, you get this nice looking jacket. Unfortunately, it's not a gatefold, so it is going to get some corner crinkling and such because it's 2 discs shoved in here. In terms of it being a special edition, it's a bit of a misnomer because it's just the trailer and some interview pieces at the end compared to the legitimate Criterion Special Edition. But I'm sure the picture will probably be a little bit sharper because this is a 1994 disc. This is DADC USA. It doesn't have any rot reports on the Laserdisc database. And again, this was so dirt cheap. It was basically less than $1. So I went ahead and decided I would get this just to compare to the Criterion. And it does have the Dolby Stereo track on the as digital PCM. So just got this out of curiosity, and of course we'll scan through the interviews at the end as well. This is one of those films that's always interesting to come back to, and of course it's now got a fancier Blu-ray release, but it's definitely one that doesn't pop up very often. Next is the 1951 classic, and fittingly because I went over the George Stevens documentary earlier, this is another of the absolute classic masterpieces that he directed. That is of course A Place in the Sun from the Paramount Great Writers series. So it has the sort of bound book design to the cover, like the others that I've gotten and gone over in my collection before. This one is spread across 2 discs, all CLV, because it is a 2-hour film. This is one of the great classic dramas of the 50s. Beautifully shot in black and white, and I'm very curious to check out the LD transfer. It's PCM mono on the digital tracks, and like most of these, when they had the opportunity to in this Writers series, it does have the isolated score on the analog right track, and they nicely said they have chapter encoded that as well. So the chapter stops also go for the analog music only isolated track too, which is a really cool touch. I really like these in this series. I like that Paramount, tried to do something special for these. Unfortunately, not all of them are letterboxed when they should be, but this being, Academy ratio, that's not an issue. And I'm just very curious to check out the transfer itself because I'm always curious to see how those stack up against later releases. But anytime I can get a great classic film like this on Laserdisc, especially at a nice price, I'm very happy to do so. Next, from my Billy Wilder shelf, this is one I've always wanted to get. Doesn't pop up very often because it's one of the mid-90s these Paramount remastered discs. They were doing a lot of these sort of stealth widescreen remasters that would just sort of slip out. This one isn't widescreen. It's still Academy ratio. There's still an aspect ratio debate on this film. There's even 2 versions on Blu-ray in the different ratios. But that is, of course, for Sabrina. This has the standard art that was on all the VHS releases, but has the little remastered banner tucked in on the side. This is very much like what they did for Roman Holiday on Laserdisc when they reissued it in the 90s, gave it color art, and then, just tucked in on the side that it was, a remastered edition. This adds digital mono, and I will be comparing this to the Blu-ray edition. This is one of those films where you can make the argument for Academy ratio or for matted widescreen. It has been shown both ways, and again, it is on 2 different Blu-rays in different ways. The older one being Academy, like this version is, and all the old releases were, and then the newer scan, or should I say newer Blu-ray, is matted widescreen. This is an interesting film in Wilder's career, and really in the career of the 3 main stars, Bogart and William Holden and Audrey Hepburn. It's very important for all 3. In terms of the film's overall effectiveness, I don't think it ever quite fully fires or on all cylinders. It's still a great classic, and it's wonderful to come back to, but it was a very troubled production in terms of everybody felt they could never quite get the script right based from the original play. So I always do have some quibbles with it, but it's still wonderful to see these particular 3 stars interacting at this time, and it's interesting to see Bogart out of his relative comfort zone in terms of the parts he was typically playing. And of course, it was later in his career when he was much older and doing other types of roles by this point. And I always liked seeing him on screen with Bill Holden. And of course, they earlier starred in the great gangster film classic Invisible Stripes all the way back in 1939. But of course, it's impossible to see this film and not completely become obsessed by Audrey Hepburn, who is, of course, a vision, as she was in everything she ever did practically. And all that with the typical Billy Wilder flourishes and touch on top of the original Samuel Taylor play. So it's still a classic. I still love it. It's still, a great film, but it's one that I do know quite a bit about the production of, and it was a very troubled production in terms of it turned out a film that nobody quite felt worked on all levels, but it's still a great classic. It's beloved by many, and I'm very happy to finally have the Pioneer pressed Paramount reissue LD, which itself does not pop up very often. Last will be the couple box sets that I picked up. These first 2 are from the wonderful MGM UA series that would all focus on a particular actor. These aren't often talked about, and they're not a particular collection series, but since they all have the same design, I think it's good to group them all together, and they feature a lot of really important iconic titles. Some were never released separately with digital audio. These were all either upgrades or new to Laserdisc, and then some have never, obviously have not gotten Blu-rays, and some are only available through the Warner Archive MOD DVD service. So for a good number of these, this is actually still a very viable way to watch the film, and some of these masters were reused for those Warner Archive DVDs, and when you see these pop up on Turner Classic Movies, a lot of times, if there's no, modern version, this will still be the master that they're playing. And of course, you get the benefit of having PCM audio and the really nice box art design for these. So I have a good majority of these. Unfortunately, some are quite rare. Some don't pop up very often. They usually don't, and when they do locally, they're beat to crap. I've seen some that were just totally destroyed, which is kind of heartbreaking to see some of these boxes get that way. But they do have some really iconic titles, and anytime I can find one of these, I'm very happy to do so because I really love them. And so starting that with the really well done collection of 4 films, the Clark Gable collection from MGM UA in the early 90s. I love the fact that they went with a vintage still of each star or individual. I love the black and white presentation of this Gable headshot with the matching collection gold banner in the top, matching other MGM UA LDs. And this is a really nice, glossy, hard box. So it's a fancier box from them. They didn't always do these glossy covers in terms of their boxes, but this one has a really nice thick gloss to it. It's a really premium box, so this is one you will definitely want to find in good shape. As you can see here on the rear, it very clearly tells you it contains the films Red Dust, Boomtown, Honky Tonk, and Mogambo. All have Academy ratio transfers, all are PCM mono, and they do include the available trailers for each. I believe they're all contained at the end. What's also great about these, even though it's just boxes where you have the discs inside and some foam inserts, they did take the time to make these really nice inserts. They're almost always color tinted, so you get this great shot of Gable, and then you get a little bit of info with more wonderful stills, original poster art and original stills, and then your chapter breakdowns. And then I love the fact that they've got the Gable caricature there underneath the chapter overlay on the second panel, and then the credits and descriptions for each film. What's also great about this particular box set, unlike most Laserdisc box sets that have just one film running into the other to save disc space, because the films are, technically shorter, each one gets its own disc. So this is 4 discs, each film is on 2 sides, and they're all individually presented, which is really cool because I like being able to do that and not immediately have the, first 5 or 10 minutes or 20 minutes of the next movie start and then have to, flip more discs. So it's always a nice touch when they could do that. Also, it's helpful because I now have a fresh copy of Mogambo with PCM audio because my Warner DVD copy from the Gable Signature Collection is unfortunately rotted. So now I have another copy to watch of the John Ford directed Mogambo. And also the really cool thing from this particular period of MGM Video, as most releases were produced under his authority, but also when he would get the actual credit on the box, you have this one was produced by George Feltenstein and Peter Fitzgerald, but of course, George Feltenstein is once again back at Warner Archive and in charge of their incredible division. And it's great to get that sense of home video history for not just Feltenstein, but other individuals who have been, doing this for quite some time and always striving for the best possible in the realm of home video in various different eras. The same seller had another nice condition copy of another MGM UA box set, one I've always wanted to get simply because it's got such important titles in it. I was very curious about the transfer quality, but so they made me a nice package deal. And so I also got the Garbo collection, again with a nice still, this time with a slightly different sort of burgundy banner across the top, makes it stand out a little bit more. And this one very similarly gives you 4 films: Flesh and the Devil, Anna Christie, Anna Karenina, and Camille, all with PCM mono, and I do believe this also has some trailers where available. The difference here, like some of these box sets, they didn't produce internal booklets, but they actually put the art and pasted it to the box lid. So here's the lid with the actual little description of each film, and then the credits with this absolutely stunning shot of Garbo there on really nice glossy paper stock. Should also mention that the box itself has a nice gloss to it. It's about the same as the Gable box. And then you have to take all the discs out and the foam insert to get to the bottom of the box where you get the chapter stops. So also taking the time to give a beautiful Garbo still there, and then you have your chapter stops. 2 of the films do include their trailers, so I guess they only had 2 trailers that had survived by this point. And just like the Gable box, they were nicely able to encode each film on its own separate disc. So 4 discs, 4 films, all presented separately. And then once again, you get the Produced for Laserdisc by George Feltenstein and Peter Fitzgerald. So these boxes are all of a similar ilk, and they're technically, I think you can refer to them as the MGM Actor Star box sets. They did a number of these, at least 10 or 15 or so. They're not super common. Some are much more common than others, but it's very difficult finding these at a good price in complete shape with all the inserts and without a dinged up box or a torn box lid. They are really wonderfully done. Unfortunately, the Garbo one here only has 4 films. They did do digital sound reissues of some other films like Queen Christina, for example, but those were released individually. These were all supplanted, of course, when they did the Garbo Signature Collection DVD box set. But as with all this stuff, I always like comparing even the Laserdisc to the DVDs, and then that set didn't have all the titles that were on Laserdisc. There are still Garbo titles that are exclusive to the Warner Archive. So I think it's cool being able to get these and compare them, and they're still really well done, and I just love this series that MGMUA did for these box sets. And then last but certainly not least, this was another local find, and it was relatively inexpensive and complete and in perfect shape. And I know trying to find one of these and then trying to get it shipped because of its size and weight and trying to get it not dinged up or damaged is a bit tricky, so I couldn't just leave it there. It is one of the most notable Laserdisc releases in terms of packaging. It is one of the great releases in home video history in that regard. It is one of the top essential, well-known, beloved Laserdisc exclusive box sets. And that is what I think is the most elaborate of the Pioneer special editions without question. And that is, of course, their deluxe special edition release of the Oliver Stone film Platoon. This, of course, did get a standalone version with the same Laserdisc contents, but without this enormous, handsome, ultra detailed, with extreme attention to quality, sort of combat diary version, complete with embossed dog tags on here, the central cast photo, which is on real glossy photo stock, the title sort of imprinted on there, and the sort of bound quality here of the actual spine, and then the way it's made to look like an actual diary or photo album scrapbook is probably the best way to describe it. And you see pictures of this, but until you get it in your hands, it's not really apparent how much quality control went into this. So you get a full-on piece in the front, written directly to you, the viewer, or purchaser of the set. Once you lift the first page, you get to see the stone photo in its clear form on the page, and then the rest of the printed book is this wonderful photo diary of not just Stone's experience in Vietnam originally, but the making of the film itself. And then you get to the actual text portions, and it is literally the Stone shooting draft for the film. There is stuff identified as being from the pre-production draft, and then stuff that was changed for the final cut, and stuff that survived through the final cut. So it not only gives you that, it gives you actual hand-drawn storyboard pieces, more beautiful photos from the film and the production itself. Again, the level of quality in this, the level of detail is unrivaled. This is one of the legitimate top-tier Laserdisc releases for the packaging, with good reason, as you can tell here. I'd always read about this, I'd seen pictures of it, but I'd never gotten to actually look at one in my hands. And just looking at this and the attention to care and the obvious love and affection for this film is massive. And then you get to the back of the book, and the way this is designed in particular is very unique. So the actual disc contents, as I said before, is the same as what you get in the standard special edition release that Pioneer did about the same time. The one with just the darkened shot of the soldier on front, as opposed to the earlier pan and scan versions. But here you get the Laserdisc credits printed as the last page in the book, and then you get the information about the actual audio contents. So it has the original Dolby Stereo soundtrack on the digital tracks, and then on the analog tracks you get the Oliver Stone commentary on the right channel, and then I guess the left channel is a mono fold down of the score. I should clarify, this is not technically the film's original mix. It is a new remix from original elements that is trying to keep to the same design, but it does actually give you a note about the audio, who did the remastering, where it was done. It was done from the original 6-track mix from the 70mm release, and it also, because this is the extended version, they had to also rely on some other elements. They didn't have all the original elements due to, as it literally credits, stems and outtakes were apparently destroyed in the Hemdale Orion bankruptcy, so it doesn't, sugarcoat what actually happened to the original sources. But I love the quote: "Using the most advanced mixing board, we created as much surround effect as possible while carefully maintaining the vocal center stage." So again, this is not the original Dolby Stereo track. It's not the original 70mm 6-track Dolby mix, but it is a custom home video remix trying to keep the original sonic identity while maximizing as much as possible the capabilities of Dolby Surround at home. So I think this is probably most akin to the custom remix done for the Star Wars trilogy on the 1993 Definitive Collection in terms of using the original sources to maximize as best as possible in Dolby Surround. I don't know exactly how this compares to the later 5.1 releases. There are so many releases of this film by now, and new extras and new transfers and things, but none have ever come close to the level of detail and quality and packaging and extras in terms of the physical landscape of physical media. This is still one of the great show-off pieces of Laserdisc for good reason. And then we come to the actual disc itself. Now, it is housed in this gatefold sleeve. I believe this is custom art. It's not, that isn't on the standalone. I don't own the standalone one of the special edition, but I believe it's got different art in its gatefold. So when you open it, it's actually like glued on to the back of that book housing, so definitely don't try and remove it. But it's got this beautiful black and white shot with the credits and then telling you the transfers in 185:1, and it's THX certified, it's PCM Dolby Surround encoded. But you open it and you get the beautiful gatefold shot with the helicopter coming overhead and giving you your chapter breakdowns. Sides 1 and 2 are in CLV, and then the finale on side 3 is in CAV. Then you get into the supplement sections, original trailer, and then more photo still galleries. And then side 4, which is CLV, you get the whole making of documentary, which was, I believe, created for this particular release, and things have been ported to the later DVDs and such, and of course supplanted by newer extras and documentaries. But still a wonderful presentation here, gorgeous art. Then of course you actually close the book and just have the standard rear. I guess this would have had a little hype sticker on the original packaging with like the little, the table of contents. I don't know. I'm just guessing, but that would have obviously been on the back of the shrink wrap. But all in all, this is an absolutely essential, gorgeous Laserdisc package. In terms of all the disc contents, you can get the standalone one, and you don't have to get the box. The standalone one won't set you back more than $5 or $10. This typically goes for quite a bit. It is very hard to find complete and in minty shape. And again, because of the weight and the dimensions, you will pay a good amount to have this properly shipped to you. So it is nice and advisable to find a copy in person that you can verify is complete, is in mint condition, and you could literally buy it there if the price is right. So finally was able to do all those things, and found this in person, and just I'm so blown away by the quality of this release, finally having it in my hands. Again, it has real heft and weight to it. This is without question, this is one of the most premium video releases I have ever seen. Like this is top tier Laserdisc packaging with good reason. It is iconic for that. This is up there with the big Laserdisc boxes. It doesn't have it doesn't have all the fancy swag and things that some do. It doesn't include the soundtrack on a CD and such, but the attention to detail, the packaging, the actual photo pages, and the reproduction of the original shooting script with earmarks for what things were changed and deleted and added. I mean, this is a whole other level. This is something that you just do not see anymore. It's probably a level of quality you're never going to see again. This is a top-tier Laserdisc package with good reason. This shows you what the format could achieve back in the day. This is one of the pinnacle highlights of what a home video physical package can be. And it's not full of a bunch of swag. This is a definite display piece. It's definitely part coffee table book, or something you can pull out and display on the shelf. But it means something. It all has meaning. It's not too big, and it is definitely showing a great love and affection for the film Platoon. So I'm very happy to finally have the full deluxe Pioneer Special Edition release in the custom photo archive war journal packaging. Again, one of the standout highlights of the Laserdisc medium in terms of physical packaging. So thanks for sticking with me through a relatively lengthy Laserdisc update. As always with these, I earmark a couple discs to set aside when I find new LDs, and then I try and wait a little bit until I have enough discs to go over. And then lo and behold, I've got a whole bunch of discs. And this one, especially finding these box sets and that lot at half-price books, and most of all, these phenomenal Hong Kong discs in perfect shape in the original jackets. I'm just so happy for a lot of these because I try to focus now on titles that are on my wish list or discs that I really, really want, or things that are more interesting and varied because I already have way too many discs everywhere. I try to be a little bit choosy in what I pick up, but sometimes some things are just so cheap or just happen to pop up and you're never going to see it again, either in condition or rarity or the fact that it's an import disc or a Hong Kong disc that just shows up at a local store out of nowhere. So if you don't get it then, you're never going to see it again, especially not at that absurdly low price sometimes. And then you get to really experience hallmarks of Laserdisc like the beautiful Platoon Pioneer Special Edition box set. So if you've stuck with me through all this, I want to say thanks ever so much as always. I really enjoy doing these videos and being able to explain to at least some people out there why I still enjoy Laserdisc and share some of the fun parts of the hobby of collecting and trying to track down better audio sources or the various digital audio tracks and things. And with some of these films, it is still it's still a viable format to watch and enjoy. But with some films that don't necessarily have the greatest transfers, and especially the Hong Kong films that have never been properly treated or fully restored to this day, it's still an important thing to do in terms of collecting these releases and trying to identify the various elements that might still be serviceable or usable, as again, as I mentioned, some fans have done in restoring audio tracks to various films and Hong Kong films by capturing the Laserdisc audio and working with boutique labels to make the best release possible to get these films with their proper audio soundtracks, at least the best we can do in feasible terms. So I don't know, as always, I don't know when my next collection update will be. It'll just be whenever I stumble across or find or grab a couple discs on eBay or various places that I think are of note. And then once I get enough to put into video form again, so I'm not just doing one at a time. But as always, thank you ever so much for watching. Keep your disc spinning, keep physical media alive, and long live Laserdisc.